I never thought it would happen to me. I was the perfect wife, devoted, loving, and loyal. But what I didn't know was that behind my back, he was betraying me in the worst way possible. I stumbled upon the truth by accident, and when I found out what he had been doing, it shattered everything. He thought I wouldn't fight back. He thought I was too weak. But what happened next? I wasn't the victim anymore. I had a secret of my own, and I was about to use it to make him regret ever crossing me. I never thought it would happen to me. I was the perfect wife, devoted, loving, and loyal. But what I didn't know was that behind my back, he was betraying me in the worst way possible. I stumbled upon the truth by accident, and when I found out what he had been doing, it shattered everything. He thought I wouldn't fight back. He thought I was too weak. But what happened next? I wasn't the victim anymore. I had a secret of my own, and I was about to use it to make him regret ever crossing me. I had always prided myself on being the wife everyone dreamed of, caring, patient, and supportive. I had given everything to my marriage, investing my time and energy into making it perfect. To the outside world, we were the ideal couple. My husband, James, was successful, charming, and handsome. We lived in a beautiful home, went on vacations, and shared laughter over dinner. But behind closed doors, there was always something gnawing at me, a gut feeling that something wasn't right. At first, I chalked it up to insecurity. After all, I had nothing to worry about, right? James was always complimenting me, reassuring me of his love, telling me how lucky he was to have me. But over time, I started noticing things that felt off. He was working late more often, answering his phone in hushed tones, and being defensive when I asked simple questions. It wasn't that I didn't trust him, but the pieces didn't add up. Something was wrong. The tipping point came one evening when I was looking for a document in our office. James had been out, working late yet again, and I thought I'd get some paperwork organized for him. As I sifted through the pile of papers on his desk, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. It was a bank statement, a large withdrawal that I didn't recognize. It was a significant amount, taken from an account that I didn't know about. My heart skipped a beat. I opened the statement, hoping that there would be an explanation, a reason behind it. But as I scanned the details, I realized this wasn't a mistake or an oversight. The money had been transferred into an account under a name I didn't recognize, a name that didn't belong to anyone I knew. My suspicion turned into something much worse. I felt my hands shake as I held the paper, my mind racing with questions. What was he hiding? I didn't know how to react. My first instinct was to confront him, but I wasn't sure what I was even confronting him about. Was he cheating on me? Was he gambling? I didn't know. All I had was a bank statement and a sense of betrayal that cut through me like a knife. The next day, I waited for him to return home. I tried to stay calm, tried to push the feeling of dread away, but I couldn't. When he walked through the door, I could see it on his face. He was hiding something. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my instincts were screaming at me. "James, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, looking at me with concern, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew what was coming. "I found something," I continued, holding up the bank statement. "What is this? Why did you take this money? Who is this account for?" His face paled. He froze, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. "It's nothing, it's just business stuff. I'll explain." "Business stuff?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't lie to me, James. This isn't just business. I want the truth." For the next few minutes, he tried to deflect, trying to convince me that it was no big deal. He claimed it was for a project he was working on, something that didn't concern me. But the more he spoke, the more I could tell he was lying. His eyes darted around the room, his posture stiffened, and I saw the cracks in his story. He was hiding something. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is she?" I demanded. Tell me the truth, James. The color drained from his face. His silence spoke volumes. That's when it hit me. My husband wasn't just hiding money from me. He was hiding something far worse. My heart sank. I felt sick to my stomach as the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. He was having an affair. I had known something was off for so long, but to hear him admit it, even without the words, was devastating. I had been living in a lie, in a relationship where I had given everything to him, trusting him with my heart, only to discover that he had been deceiving me the whole time. The hurt was unbearable. I had always thought family was supposed to be my biggest support, my safe place. But now I was alone in my pain, questioning everything I thought I knew. The person I had loved, the person I had trusted with my life, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And just like that, my perfect world came crashing down. The truth hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything I had believed about my life, my marriage, and the man I had given my heart to. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my husband, James, crumbled. I wasn't just facing the painful truth that he had been unfaithful. I was facing the reality that I had been living in a lie, believing in a relationship that wasn't what I thought it was. I sat there, numb, trying to process the situation, but the room felt suffocating. James stood before me, looking regretful but defensive, as if he wanted to explain but didn't know how. He kept muttering, "It's not what you think," but his words didn't matter anymore. The trust I had placed in him was shattered, and there was no going back. "Who is she?" I asked again, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. "How long has this been going on?" James hesitated for a moment, then hung his head. "It's been going on for about 6 months," he confessed, his voice low. "Her name's Emily. I don't know what happened. It just happened." 6 months. For 6 months, he had been lying to my face, betraying me with someone else, while I had been oblivious, living my life as if everything was perfect. The weight of it was suffocating, and I struggled to catch my breath as I tried to make sense of it all. How could he do this to me? How could he betray everything we had built? The anger started to boil over. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a place that had once been a sanctuary, now turned into a battlefield. Every memory, every shared moment seemed tainted. I was no longer sure who I was, who we were, or who I had become in this marriage. "You really think I can just let this go, don't you?" I spat, my voice shaking with fury. "You think I'll just forgive you? Like nothing ever happened?" James didn't say anything for a long time, just standing there, looking like a man who had been caught in the most devastating of lies. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine regret or just fear of the consequences. "Please, just hear me out," he begged. "I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you, but I want to make it right. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." But the words felt empty, hollow. Love? If he truly loved me, how could he do this? How could he betray me in such a cruel and hurtful way? "You don't get to decide that anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You don't get to choose how this ends. I'm the one who gets to decide if this marriage is worth saving, and right now, I don't even know if I can look at you without feeling disgusted." I stood up and walked out of the room, needing to get away, to clear my head, to escape the suffocating weight of his lies. I needed to think, to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. I had thought that I knew him, that we were partners in this life. But now it felt like I was seeing a stranger. I walked out of the house and into the cool night air, the sharpness of the cold air making me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in so long. My mind raced, and I tried to make sense of what I had just learned. My marriage had been a lie. A beautiful, well-crafted lie that I had willingly bought into for years. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this betrayal wasn't just about James. It was about me. It was about how I had allowed myself to be blind to the warning signs, how I had turned a blind eye to his behavior because I wanted to believe in something that wasn't real. As I walked through the empty streets, I began to realize that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of this betrayal. I had to do something about it. I had to take back control. I had to show James and myself that I was strong enough to walk away from this, no matter how hard it was. But then a thought hit me. Maybe I didn't have to walk away completely. Maybe I had a secret of my own, something that could not only expose James's lies, but could also give me the power I needed to take back what was mine. I had been so focused on the pain he had caused me, but maybe the time had come for me to turn the tables. I wasn't just going to be the victim in this story. I was going to make sure James knew exactly what it felt like to be exposed for who he truly was. The night air was sharp as I walked, but I didn't feel the cold. My mind was swirling, spinning with the revelation that had turned my world upside down. The betrayal by James was something I couldn't just brush off. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything I had built my life on, the trust, the love, the promises that now seemed hollow. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something crucial. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I spent the next few days trying to process everything. My emotions were in turmoil, but I knew that I couldn't stay in this place of anger and betrayal. I needed to take action. I needed to expose James for the liar he was, and to do that, I needed something more than just the affair. I needed leverage, something that would make him regret ever thinking he could play me for a fool. I started by looking into everything James had been doing during the time he'd been cheating on me. The financial transactions, the late-night meetings, the mysterious trips he'd taken without me, everything. I spent hours going through his emails and texts, trying to piece together his web of lies. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to uncover things I hadn't expected. James had been hiding more than just his affair. As I dug deeper, I found several large, unexplained transfers of money. Money that didn't come from his paycheck or savings. Some of it came from accounts I had never seen before. He'd been funneling money into a secret account. But what was even more surprising was that this wasn't just some affair-related slush fund. These accounts were linked to a series of investments and businesses he had been running without my knowledge. I couldn't believe it. My first thought was that maybe I had been blind to the extent of his deceit. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that the money wasn't just for him. It was for someone else. Someone I hadn't suspected. There, buried in the records, was the name of a woman, a business partner I had never heard of. A name that seemed to reappear over and over again in James's secret dealings. Her name was Emily, and from what I could see, she wasn't just the mistress. She was a partner in a series of investments that were generating a significant amount of money. I felt sick to my stomach as I pieced everything together. James hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been using our marriage as a front while secretly building a business empire with Emily. The money he'd been making wasn't just for their affair. It was for a future he had been planning with her, one that didn't involve me at all. The anger I had been feeling over his betrayal was now replaced with a burning fury. He had taken so much from me, not just my trust, but my future. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I continued digging through the documents, I found something far more sinister. It was a series of emails that James had exchanged with Emily. Emails that detailed plans for an upcoming business venture. In the final email, I found something that made my blood run cold. a note that mentioned a life insurance policy on me. At first, I thought it was just a passing comment, maybe a joke. But the more I read, the more I realized that it wasn't. James and Emily had been discussing ways to make me disappear, ways to ensure that I wouldn't be a hindrance to their future plans. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I wasn't just dealing with an affair. I was dealing with something much darker. James had been planning to take everything from me, my money, my future, and my life. He had been using Emily not just for an affair, but as a means to an end. I had been nothing more than a pawn in his grand scheme. This was it. This was my chance to take control back. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't just walk away and let James and Emily live their lives while I stood by, powerless. I had everything I needed. The financial records, the emails, the secret plans. It was all in front of me. But the most shocking piece of the puzzle was the life insurance policy James had taken out on me. It wasn't just money. It was a plan to get rid of me entirely. As I sat there in the quiet of the night, staring at the documents in front of me, I realized that this wasn't just about getting revenge. This was about saving myself. James hadn't just betrayed me. He had put my life in danger, and now it was my turn to make sure he paid for what he had done. I had a secret of my own, and it was time for him to find out exactly who he was dealing with. I couldn't afford to be weak anymore. I had to be strong. I had to expose everything, tear down his lies, and take back control of my life. And once I did that, I would make sure he regretted every moment he ever spent with me. The days after uncovering the full extent of James's betrayal felt like a blur. I had never imagined that my life would take such a dark turn. But now that I had the truth in my hands, there was no turning back. I was done being the victim. I was done being naive. James had crossed the line, and I was ready to make him face the consequences. I spent the next few days carefully planning my next move. I couldn't just walk up to him and tell him what I knew. He would deny it, try to manipulate me as he always had. No, this time I had to be smart. I had to expose him in a way that he couldn't talk his way out of. I had all the evidence, everything I needed to bring him to his knees. I reached out to my lawyer, shared the bank statements, the emails, and the life insurance policy. He was shocked, but he understood the gravity of the situation. "This is criminal, Rachel," he said. "You've got the leverage you need, but be careful. If you push too hard, he may try to retaliate." Retaliation. That word stayed with me. James wouldn't just take this lying down. I knew that. But I was ready. I wasn't the same woman who had stood by, letting him lie to me, letting him take advantage of me. I had my power now, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. The day of the confrontation arrived. I had decided to confront him in the place where we had shared so many memories. Our home. The place where I had once felt safe and loved. But today, it felt like a battleground, and I was ready to fight. I texted James earlier that day, telling him we needed to talk. I wasn't going to give him any excuses to avoid it. He agreed to meet me at home, his reply short and terse. I knew he was dreading what was coming, but I was done caring about his feelings. When he walked through the door, I could tell he was already on edge. His posture was stiff, his eyes darting around the room like he was trying to gauge what kind of mood I was in. But I wasn't going to give him the chance to control the narrative. I had the upper hand now. "Sit down," I told him, my voice calm, steady, but laced with a hint of authority. James hesitated for a moment, but he obeyed. I could feel his nervous energy, the way his eyes avoided mine. It was the same look he had when he had tried to gaslight me all those years. But now there was no escaping the truth. The tables had turned. "I know everything, James," I said, sliding the stack of papers toward him. "The money, the accounts, the affair. And I know about Emily, too. You thought you could get away with it, but you won't. Not this time." His face went pale. The smugness that had once defined him was gone. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. But the shock in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't ready for this. He had underestimated me for far too long. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice cracked. "This is some sort of mistake. I've always been loyal to you. You have to believe me." "Loyal?" I scoffed. "You've been betraying me for months, maybe longer. You think I'm going to believe you now? After everything?" His eyes flickered nervously and I could see the panic setting in. He was losing control. I wasn't going to let him manipulate the situation anymore. "You didn't just have an affair, James. You took everything from me. You manipulated our entire marriage and I was too blind to see it. But now I know what you've been doing. You and Emily have been stealing from me for months, and I have the proof." I pushed the bank statements toward him. His eyes widened as he looked at the numbers, at the transactions he had thought would stay hidden forever. He looked up at me, desperation creeping into his voice. "Rachel, please. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to build something for us. I was trying to protect us." "Protect us?" I repeated, my voice growing colder. "You don't get to use that excuse anymore. You weren't protecting us. You were protecting yourself, your secrets, your lies." His gaze dropped to the papers on the table, and for a brief moment, I saw the truth in his eyes. A man who knew he had been caught, who realized that everything he had built was about to come crashing down. "You've been lying to me for years, James," I said, my voice firm, "and I won't let you do it anymore. I'm taking back everything you stole from me, the money, the trust, and my dignity. You won't get away with it. Session 011. The silence between us was thick, heavy. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. James was no longer the confident, manipulative man he had been. Now, he was just a man who had been exposed for the fraud he was. He sat there, defeated, unable to find the words to defend himself. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about standing up for myself, no longer allowing anyone, especially James, to define who I was or what I deserved. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth," I said, standing up. "You can't hide behind lies anymore, James. The world will know who you really are." The following days were a blur of emotions. After the confrontation with James, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. The truth had come out, but it wasn't as simple as just revealing the lies. There was still the emotional fallout, the betrayal that had taken root deep inside me. I had exposed James. I had confronted him, but there was still work to be done. It wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about healing and reclaiming the life I had lost in the process. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. But it wasn't the satisfaction of seeing James squirm or knowing that I had brought his deceit into the light. It was the understanding that I had done this for myself. I hadn't done it to punish him. I had done it to free myself. Every time I thought back to how much I had sacrificed for this marriage, for him, it angered me. I had put everything on hold to make him happy, to build the perfect life. And in return, he had destroyed everything I had worked for. But the aftermath was not easy. As the days passed, I realized that I wasn't just confronting James anymore. I was confronting myself. All those years of giving, of loving, of sacrificing, had they been worth it? Or had I simply allowed myself to be manipulated, to become someone I didn't recognize? It was hard not to feel guilty, even after everything he had done. Maybe if I had been more assertive, more vigilant, none of this would have happened. The questions lingered in my mind, but I had to stop. I couldn't keep punishing myself for his mistakes. The healing process wasn't just about moving forward. It was about forgiving myself for the role I had played in this entire ordeal. I began seeing a therapist. someone I could talk to who could help me unpack all the emotions I had bottled up. Every session was a new discovery, a chance to explore what had happened and why I had allowed myself to fall into the trap James had set for me. The more I opened up, the more I realized how much strength I had, how much power I could reclaim. This wasn't just about confronting him. It was about confronting my own vulnerabilities, about understanding where I had gone wrong, and about learning how to do better. The first few weeks after everything came to light were the hardest. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I was strong enough to truly move forward. But as time went on, I realized that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. The lies James had spun didn't define me. I was no longer the woman who had stayed silent, waiting for him to change. I was the woman who had exposed the truth, who had taken control of her future. That was the woman I wanted to be. While the emotional journey of reclaiming myself was crucial, the legal battle was far from over. With the truth now out in the open, James had no choice but to face the consequences. His attempt to dismiss the severity of his actions, his lies, his manipulation, and the secret accounts had backfired. The evidence was clear, and he couldn't escape it. But even as I gathered strength and found peace in my own self-worth, the battle wasn't won. The next phase involved fighting for what was legally mine. The inheritance, the property, the assets that James had tried to keep from me, they were rightfully mine. He had stolen not just emotionally, but financially. It was time to make sure that the law would hold him accountable. I spent countless hours working with my attorney, reviewing the evidence and pushing for a settlement that would ensure I received what I was owed. But as we approached the negotiations, I began to see a side of James I hadn't expected: his desperation. He was no longer the arrogant, manipulative man I had known. Now he was pleading, trying to make me believe that he was the victim, that he had done everything for us, and was merely trying to protect our future. It was maddening to hear him speak in this way. After everything, after his betrayal, after his years of lying and stealing, it was almost laughable that he still believed he could manipulate me. But he tried. He tried every trick in the book. He attempted to play the family card, asking for mercy, but I wasn't buying it anymore. Mercy? He had shown none when he took everything from me. The settlement discussions were tense, filled with back and forth legal jargon and tactics. But in the end, I won. Not only did I recover the inheritance, but I also secured additional financial compensation for the emotional distress James had caused. For the first time in months, I felt like I had won. Truly won. This was the validation I needed. Not just the money, but the sense of justice, of control. It was mine again. While the legal proceedings had given me some sense of closure, there was still the matter of making sure James paid for what he had done publicly. I couldn't let him walk away from this without facing the full extent of his actions. I knew it would be difficult to expose the full extent of the lies to our family, our friends, but I wasn't going to let him hide behind his wealth and charm anymore. The world needed to know who he truly was. He needed to be held accountable not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of everyone he had deceived. I reached out to several people we knew, the ones who had been close to us, the ones who believed in our perfect marriage, the ones who had no idea of the lies that had been hidden behind closed doors. It wasn't about revenge or getting back at him. It was about making sure everyone saw him for who he truly was: a manipulative, selfish man who had betrayed his wife and family for his own gain. I didn't care about the damage it would do to our social circles. I didn't care about the way it would make me look. What mattered was exposing the truth. What mattered was making sure no one else fell victim to his charming lies. The fallout was as severe as I had anticipated. Friends distanced themselves, some choosing to believe James's side of the story, others quietly falling away as the reality of his deceit spread. Our family, who had once adored him, now viewed him with suspicion. His reputation, once pristine, was now irreparably damaged, and while I had no satisfaction in watching him lose everything, I knew it was what he deserved. But in the midst of all of it, something unexpected happened. I began to rebuild my own life. The more I spoke my truth, the more I embraced who I was without him. I started focusing on my career, my passions, and myself. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the woman who had stood tall, confronted her pain, and emerged victorious. In the months following the public exposure of James's lies, I began the slow and difficult journey of healing. It wasn't just about reclaiming the money or exposing his deception. It was about rebuilding my life from the ground up, piece by piece. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of his manipulation, allowing his actions and words to define my sense of self-worth. But now, with him out of the picture, I had the space to rediscover who I truly was. I decided to focus on myself in ways I never had before. For years, my identity had been entwined with James, his career, his success, his goals. I had sacrificed my own dreams to support him, thinking that together we could build the perfect life. But when everything fell apart, I realized that I had lost sight of myself along the way. The first step was to rediscover my passions. I had always loved painting, but I had put it aside, convincing myself that there was no time for it. Now I allowed myself to take the time to create. My art became a form of therapy, a way for me to process the emotional pain and trauma I had endured. As I painted, I felt the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. The colors on the canvas were more than just strokes of paint. They were symbols of my journey, my struggle, and my strength. But the healing didn't stop there. I began to reach out to friends who had always been there for me, but whom I had pushed away during the years of my marriage. I apologized to them, not for what had happened, but for the way I had neglected those relationships in favor of a man who didn't deserve my loyalty. Slowly, I started to rebuild the friendships that mattered most, and in doing so, I found a sense of community that had been missing from my life for so long. As I embraced this new chapter, I also found myself seeking professional help. Therapy had always been something I had put off, thinking I could handle things on my own. But now, with everything that had happened, I realized I couldn't do it alone. Therapy gave me the tools to understand the pain I had experienced and to process it in a healthy way. I learned that healing wasn't a linear process. It was messy, complicated, and filled with setbacks. But each step I took brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. As the months passed and I continued to rebuild, I realized that the journey of healing had also become a journey of transformation. I was no longer the woman who had been trapped in a toxic marriage, afraid to speak up, to make her own decisions. The woman who had once been overlooked and manipulated had now found her voice. This transformation wasn't just emotional. It was also physical. I had let myself go in the years I had spent focusing on James. I had put my needs on the back burner, convinced that taking care of myself wasn't as important as supporting him. But now I made it a priority. I started going to the gym, eating healthier, and taking care of my body in ways I had neglected for far too long. The changes were subtle at first. More energy, better sleep, a sense of empowerment that came from taking control of my own life. But over time, the changes became more noticeable. I felt stronger, both inside and out. I had spent so long trying to hold everything together for someone else. But now I was doing it for me. I wasn't waiting for validation from anyone. I had learned to validate myself. One of the most profound changes came when I decided to leave the city we had lived in for years. It was a place that had been tainted by too many memories, too many reminders of James's betrayal. I needed a fresh start, a new environment that would allow me to leave the past behind and focus on the future. I moved to a small town by the coast, where the pace of life was slower and the air was fresher. It felt like the perfect place to begin again. I found a new job, one that allowed me to use my skills and talents in a way that was both fulfilling and rewarding. I had always dreamed of becoming a writer, but I had put that dream aside, thinking it wasn't practical. But now I was writing more than ever: blog posts, short stories, personal essays. It was liberating to finally pursue something that was my own, something that made me feel whole. The most important change, however, was the transformation in how I saw myself. I had spent years looking for validation in others, especially in my marriage. I had believed that my worth came from being loved by someone else. But now I realized that my worth was intrinsic. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was valuable. I already knew it. Life, as it often does, has a funny way of throwing surprises at us when we least expect them. One afternoon, while I was working at a local coffee shop, my eyes met those of a man sitting across from me. He wasn't remarkable in the traditional sense. No flashy clothes, no overly confident air about him. But there was something in his gaze, something that caught me off guard. He smiled and gave a polite nod, as if recognizing me from somewhere. At first, I didn't know who he was, but as he came closer, his face started to seem familiar. "Rachel?" he asked, his voice soft. "Do I know you?" I asked, squinting, still unsure. "It's me, Tom, from college. We were in the same writing class." The recognition hit me like a wave. Tom had been a classmate back in college, a quiet, introspective guy who always kept to himself. We had never really been close, but I remembered him vividly. He had always been the kind of person you couldn't help but notice because he was so easy to talk to. We chatted for a while, exchanging small talk, but it was clear that there was a connection, one that had been buried under years of life and circumstances. He listened to me when I spoke, really listened, without trying to offer solutions or make it about himself. He wasn't trying to fix me, just to understand me. It was during this conversation that I realized something profound. I had spent so many years focusing on what I had lost, on what James had taken from me. But Tom's quiet presence reminded me of something important. There were still good people out there. There were still relationships that could be built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. I didn't need to keep living in the past. I didn't need to keep holding on to the anger that had defined me for so long. The days following my chance encounter with Tom felt surreal. It wasn't just the unexpected meeting, it was what it represented. For so long, I had been focused on the past, on the pain, the betrayal, and the emotional scars left by James. But in that moment, talking to Tom, I realized something powerful. I wasn't defined by my past. My future was still in my hands, and I had the power to shape it. I began to see my life through a new lens. Tom wasn't the answer to my problems. He wasn't some knight in shining armor who would come in and save me from my grief. But he represented something important, something I had forgotten about: connection. The ability to connect with someone again, to feel seen and heard without the baggage of past pain clouding the interaction. It was refreshing, and it reminded me that I still had the capacity for joy, for new experiences, for growth. Over the next few weeks, Tom and I met up a few more times. We started having deeper conversations about life, love, and what it meant to heal from the past. He didn't rush me or push me to talk about things I wasn't ready to discuss. Instead, he respected the space I needed, always willing to listen, never asking for more than I could give. That, more than anything, made me realize how much I had been lacking in genuine human connection. The kind of connection that wasn't about expectations, manipulation, or keeping up appearances. We went for walks by the beach, got coffee at the local cafe, and simply enjoyed each other's company without any pressure. It was liberating to feel so comfortable around someone, to laugh again without the weight of old memories dragging me down. One evening, as we walked along the shoreline, Tom stopped and turned to face me. "Rachel," he said softly, "I can see that you've been through a lot and I'm not here to rush anything. But I just want you to know that I'm here. You don't have to carry everything alone." His words felt like a balm to the wound I had been nursing for so long. They weren't the empty promises I had heard from James. They were just simple words, but they were spoken with sincerity and care. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Maybe, just maybe, I could let go of the anger and disappointment that had defined me for so long. Maybe, just maybe, I could start trusting again. It wasn't easy, though. The road to healing wasn't linear. There were days when I still felt the sting of betrayal, days when I questioned whether I was making the right decisions. But with every conversation, every moment of connection with Tom, I began to feel like I was moving forward. Slowly but surely, I was learning to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It wasn't about pretending that everything was fine. The scars would always be there, reminders of the pain and the loss. But they didn't define me. I was not the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had fought for herself, who had faced the worst of life and emerged stronger. I had learned how to take back control of my narrative. I had learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I could create my own happiness. The healing process continued, but with each passing day, I felt more like myself again. The weight of the past was lighter now, and I began to feel the hope that had once seemed so out of reach. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still days when the pain resurfaced. But I had learned to confront it head on, to accept it as part of my journey, rather than something that controlled me. Tom and I grew closer, but this time I wasn't rushing anything. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me. I was focused on my own growth, on continuing to build the life I wanted. And in doing so, I realized that I didn't need a man to complete me. I was whole on my own, and I was learning to trust that. I started taking on new challenges, things that I had always wanted to do but had never had the courage to pursue. I enrolled in an art class, signed up for writing workshops, and even started traveling to places I had only dreamed about. Each experience added another layer to my healing, showing me just how much I had been holding back from the world. I wasn't the woman who had been betrayed anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been deceived and left with nothing. I was Rachel, a woman who had faced the worst and emerged stronger. I had reclaimed my power, my independence, and my peace. As I stood on the beach one morning, watching the sunrise, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The past had been painful, but it had taught me invaluable lessons. It had shown me the strength I never knew I had. It had shown me the importance of trusting myself, of standing up for what I deserved, and of never settling for less than I was worth. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities. I was ready to embrace it, knowing that whatever came my way, I had the strength to face it. I had taken the final step in my healing, and I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I chose to become.